Hello everybody and welcome to another game design video. Today we're going to be talking about proud nails for the first time. This is a thing that I really enjoy as a concept in game design, and we'll talk about what they are. But specifically today we're going to talk about the double lock in AoS, which is a weird inside baseball term. Basically it means that due to a recent FAQ ruling, if a model comes into contact with two other models, it loses the ability to pile in anymore. And that can have some interesting consequences. So I'm going to talk through why I think that this recent FAQ answer was wrong and isn't good. And I'm going to talk about why it causes a big challenge with the game, something that'll catch people and sort of have a bad time and at the worst possible moments. And also why it's not a huge deal, but it's annoying. So, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about our first proud nail. There's only a couple of them, but that's why they're proud nails. So, what's a proud nail? Well, okay, obviously in carpentry terms, it's, a nail that's slightly up. Now, there can be uses to proud nails. Sometimes you intentionally leave proud nails when you're working on a project so that you can, then hook other pieces into things, or there's a use to leaving a nail slightly proud, but it means one that's slightly extended from the surface. When they're bad, it's usually, if you can picture walking across a floor or something, or a deck that has nails in it, a single proud nail sticks up from the surface, catches your foot, and you go, ow! That's a proud nail. It's a tiny little thing that sticks out from an otherwise smooth surface and catches you up and causes a little pain. Well, that's exactly what it is in a game as well. It's sort of a small rules issue in an otherwise fairly smooth game that just stands out as incongruent. It causes a problem. Like, that is to say, either as it goes against the overall game design, or its goals, or the tone of the world, or whatever. You can have proud nails that are both mechanical as well as narrative, as it were. So, one of the interesting things about proud nails is that it does require a relatively smooth game to notice. That is to say, you note the problems when there isn't many of them. Games that are generally a sloppy mess, you don't notice these because the game itself is problematic enough, or has enough issues, or has enough other serious sort of foundational problems that these tiny inconsistencies just don't show. They just don't pop up. But when you have a game that is relatively well-functioning, you notice these. The first time I heard discussion of this was in terms of D&D design in 3rd edition. There was a couple of these that the designers like to talk about, because there were elements in the sort of mechanical realities of 3rd edition that everything else worked fine, but then it would sort of produce these few unintended consequences that they thought were proud nails. Now, I mentioned that you have to have a relatively smooth game. If you've got a bed of nails, if you've got a bunch of sharp, spiky parts where things are all screwed up, you don't notice one at a slightly different height than the rest, right? Proud nails aren't the sign of a bad system. As I said, you have to have a good system to notice it. And the challenge with them, and why we should care about them, is when a system is overall a mess, people just immediately recognize it's a mess, right? And either they love it or not, by the by. There's plenty of games that are mechanically exceedingly flawed, and yet people still love them. Some might argue that original AoS was like this. I don't want to get into that argument. I don't care. Certainly, some might put a game, pick certain classic, like 80s role-playing games, many of which had a lot of mechanical challenge because it was sort of the early years of role-playing, and, the science and tech wasn't really established yet. But people still love those games, maybe because of the overall tone, or what it let them play, or the universe, or 100 other things. So even being a rules mess isn't a deal-breaker. Proud nails are problematic because they can actually really bother people. They cause a frustration with minutiae. And it has to do with your anchoring expectations. If you go to a restaurant that you happen to love the food, but you know they have bad service, Okay, this is just a known thing. It's a joint that makes incredible waffles, but man, they just, it takes forever to get seeded and forever to get serviced and forever for the food to come out. But when it comes out, oh, they're fluffy, delicious, golden, perfect waffles. When you go there and have bad service, you're not surprised. Your expectations have been met. Oftentimes with people's happiness or sadness, it has to do a lot more with expectation than the objective truth of it. The same is true in games. When people's expectations are that the system is, pretty good overall, and that they're going to have a good time, and then they run into these little sticking points, these little minutiae, it actually leads to more frustration. So even though their overall experience was more positive, the nature of human psychology is such that these small items actually cause more frustration, and they're what you remember. They're what stick out. Much as they stick out of the system itself, they're what sticks out in your memory. That's why we care about them and should try our best as we catch them to hammer them down if we can do so without disrupting the overall integrity of the game. Okay? So now that I've explained the concept of what these things are, let's actually talk about the double lock. To understand that, we need to understand piling in AoS. All right, so first, if we're going to talk about piling in within AoS, we need to talk about what the heck it even is. Well, it's 3 inches of movement when the unit is selected to fight in the combat phase. Fighting is a sort of game term that means you get to move up to 3 inches in a certain way, under certain restrictions. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then you get to attack. Yay, you get to go smash your enemy's face. It's meant to bring the models, which are free-flowing, right? Because we're dealing with a game where people aren't in movement trays. It's not a rank and flank game. So this is meant to bring those two groups of models together and represent the swirly, twirly madness that is combat, right? It's an abstraction mechanic. It's not meant to mimic exact reality. It's meant to be very gamist. Miniatures games automatically have to have some level of gamism in them that is disruptive of reality, because miniatures are, by their very nature, far more restricted than humans are when they get into combat, right? The way people act is always going to be different, more fluid, more dynamic than we can make little plastic or metal toys work. So, however you picture, this is what always amuses me when people make an argument to realism, however you picture battle working. Battle works in 100 different ways, depending on the training of the soldiers and the nature of the terrain and the nature of what's going on. There's so many variables to it. And when you have the kind of battles that we have to imagine would be happening in something like Age of Sigmar, where you have, as is pictured here, psychotic, dark power-infused Chaos Warriors going into astrally spawned, frog-directed, pseudo-hive-mindish lizard men. I'm not even sure what that looks like. But the point being, like, how they're going to act in specific. But what I can say is that I'm not going to exactly represent it with tiny plastic figures. So we're going to have to be a little gamist, right? We're going to have to use a construct. We have to have some kind of rules that dictates how these little people work and how we're going to attempt to somewhat replicate what would actually happen. Okay? And piling in is just like you got two forces close to each other. They want to get more into each other. That's what this picture is showing. That's what we, perceive this as. Unit A is touching Unit B, and I want to get them closer so that each of them wants to get closer to the other one so they can kill the other person faster, better, more. Makes perfect sense. Okay, great. By the way, the reason you don't just immediately make all of them fight, right? And this is true even back in the rank and flank period. There might be a reality to the rank and flank. Like you say, well, they can't all fight because not all their weapons reach. I mean, well, maybe. Sometimes you had very, very long weapons and people can reach into each other. Traditional, phalanxes could fight pretty deep if they were Greek phalanxes. Not all the way to the back, but could fight pretty deep. But the other reason you do that is for a very gamist construction, whether you're in a free-flowing situation like AoS or in that. It's because if you allowed everyone in a big unit to fight, you would automatically tilt the power of the game to the biggest units. Because by simply touching one model, everybody in the unit could fight. Hence, if you had a unit of 40 or 50 or 60 people, they would represent an outsized amount of power, right? Because they could just touch a model and then poof, effectively apply their entire quote-unquote profile, that is to say the combined power of all 40 models or 50 models, into combat. The restriction over this not only speaks to realism, your weapon can't reach, which is good because people have that natural association, so that's good, but it's a nice confluence because it also speaks to a very good gameplay restriction that keeps different types of units interesting. So a big monster can apply all his power, right, because it's only one thing. So it keeps those things kind of self-balanced. It's a nice meeting of two very divergent factors needing the same rules reality to be in the right place. Okay. So as we moved into Age of Sigmar 2, piling in changed. So let's talk about what it was in Age of Sigmar 1. You can see the rules up here. Basically, when you pile in, you may move each model in the unit up to 3 inches towards the closest enemy model. The rest is literally just flavor text, right, that's explaining the idea. That is the only rule step. Now, one of the interesting emergent properties of this very simply written rule was that models could get locked. If somebody was touching your base, you could no longer move, because it would be impossible to fulfill this statement, right? If two bases are touching, then when you go to pile in, you cannot get closer. You are already touching. There is 0 distance between the two models. Hence, you cannot get closer than the 0, right? So I don't even know if that was actually intended. It's interesting. It evolved. Like, I don't know if when these, I have no insight into obviously what they were thinking when they wrote the original rules. Like, I don't know if they realized that was a reality, right? The original 4-page rules were purposely built to be quite simple. So it's an interesting realization that when you write a rule, there are always second and third order consequences. And it is very difficult as a game designer to map all of those. In fact, you will never map all of them for every rule. There will always be some things you didn't realize. This is one of the reasons why even playtesting can become very hard, because playtesters might not play the situation that causes like the third order consequence to arise, but it could be very problematic. At any rate, this one right here is interesting because this whole lock mechanic and the way piling in ended up working and the nuance of it is all hidden in between the lines, right? None of it was written on the rules page. It was simply an emergent property of the way the rule was phrased. Okay. And what this meant is that because models get locked, it became this very careful, time-consuming dance. And this was the big problem. People talk about Age of Sigmar games going long or not finishing. I have always stood behind the fact that the culprit to this was not the individual movement of models. I never saw people, even with massive armies of individual tiny models, really taking that long to move. Because you have a unit of 40, you want to go 6 inches forward, you measure the front rank, you move them, and then you move the back. It's pretty fast. People have been doing it in 40k for years. Ask anybody who played like an Orc Boys Horde or a Tyranid Swarm in 40k, you can move a lot of models pretty quick. Okay? Even individually. But piling in is this incredibly nuanced, short, careful, precise movement where you're moving models around in very close proximity to others of your models and the enemies. And every little distance mattered because you wanted to lock certain models so you could stop the enemy from piling in, and you wanted to not lock other models. And you needed to make sure you went from half an inch to 0.4 inches. So you fulfilled the closer thing as you slid around somebody's base. This was the culprit of time. If anybody ever played a game against my co-host Tom Lyons, who was fanatical about this sort of rule, this is where time took, and he was very precise about it. Now, he was also a fast player, like that is to say he knew how to do this quickly, but even doing it quickly took a long time, right? You can reshelve every book in a library quickly, it's probably still going to take a while. Okay. All right, so how did this change? All right, well, in AoS 2, this was the new rule. right? So a unit can make a pile-in move if it's within 3 inches of an enemy or has made a charge in the same turn. So now we have this extra rules text clearly stated here that says, even if you're farther than 3 inches away, but you charged, you still get to pile in. Okay, cool. And then if this is the case, all right, so we fulfilled situation A. Let's talk about situation B. If this is the case, you can move each model in the unit up to 3 inches. All right, fair enough. Understood. I get that. That's a very straightforward sentence. And then each model must finish its pile-in move at least as close to the nearest enemy model as it was at the start of the move. Very small change, very, very impactful, because now I can pile in even when I'm at 0. Right? Because if it's only at least as close, if I'm at 0 and I swing around a dude and I'm still at 0, I am at least as close. Again, the interesting thing here is happening between the lines. Okay? Now, there's a small separate issue here I'll mention offhandedly that people haven't talked about, of what happens when you have a big unit strung out more than 3 inches away and it hasn't made a charge that turn, right? So like theoretically the whole unit can then move because it's not measuring individual models. I haven't seen anybody split that apart. I don't think it's an issue. What we're going to talk about is that second part. The second part, what's interesting about it is that when you finish your pile-in move at least as close to the nearest enemy model, singular, at the start of the move, what happens if you're equally close to 2 models? What can you do? By the way, an easy situation to be in a unit game. All right, so let's watch this play out. Let's look at old pile-in and new pile-in in practice. So first, let's start with the good thing. So this is a pile-in situation with 4 green guys fighting 1 blue guy. That, assume they have a reach of an inch, and those are something like 32 mil bases, the green guys. Maybe the big guys are 40 mil base. Okay, the 4th guy can't attack. The dude who says stuck, no attack. He's more than an inch away, like just for our reality, he is. Okay, obviously I can't. I'm dealing with little amorphous spheres here. I cannot move any of the green guys because they have been locked. Again, assume that the blue is touching. Within PowerPoint, you can only be so precise with little balls. They move on a grid that's invisible in the background. So if blue guy is touching all 3 green guys directly, meaning he has locked them, he has stranded the 4th guy. Now, if there were more people back there, it's entirely possible they would be stranded too. Like I capped my example at 4 here to limit the space on the page. But there could be 10 other people behind that 4th stuck no attack guy who cannot move, who cannot filter in, right? Because they cannot get closer. I mean, maybe they could kind of like squidge in, right? Where you get all this pointless piling in where they're just kind of squidging forward. But unless somebody dies up near the front, they ain't going nowhere. All right? Get out the Snickers bar, guys. You don't get to fight in this fight. All right. So let's see how that changed. Now what happens is a very good situation, right? Yay. Okay, much smoother. Now my dudes on the side can just swing around, and Mr. 4th guy can come up and fight. Okay. And what's important about this is twofold. What I really want to state here is why is this a good change? Piling in was slow and complex and very nuanced and had gotchas in it. None of that is good. That's stuff that high-end sort of gamers can exploit for slight advantages, but that's not good for the overall game. Winning a game in these sort of like cracks, these rules nuance cracks of emergent properties. And by the way, this isn't like smart play as I would define it. This is literally just like a slight emergent property of the rules. So this isn't like, oh, you read an ability and you realize it has an interesting double usage that's written on your war scroll, and so you use it in this other way. Okay, that's just smart play. This is sort of living in between the shadows of the rules that people don't realize that there's this sort of weird nuance and you're using it to your advantage. So newer players are the ones who suffer. Great. Bad number 1. Bad number 2 of the old reality. it slowed games down. It's generally bad. We want the game to play smooth and efficiently. We don't want to hit the brakes at some point in time. You generally want the game to play as though people don't have to think about the rules. I know that sounds funny, but the more you can make things autonomic sort of reflex reactions, the better. 3, it doesn't make any freaking sense. I'm not one to care very much about verisimilitude in new rules nuance like this, because, again, I don't know exactly what it means. But I think high-level verisimilitude like this, like, I have a bunch of people, they see the enemy, this unit is actively fighting them, they want to go kill that person, but instead they stand around as though they're in a queue to get a coffee. That doesn't jive, right? Like, something about my reality has snapped there. Again, I'm not asking to pull all 40 models in. It's just because who knows what time this is representing this fight. So I'm okay with it being a somewhat slow process of piling. I have to filter people up. Cool, that's fine. At least I feel like my unit understands that they need to go kill those guys. They're 6 feet away. Go walk over there and punch that guy. Okay, so now it does. Right? Now that's how it works when you got the single model. Like, everybody can filter in. It's smooth. It's so much cleaner. People fight. Big units that are sort of strung out still can't all get into combat at once. They still have to file in over multiple combat phases. So the power of large units is very much held in check. It's great. The problem is, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It works in this situation only. And I'll show you. Here's how it was. So again, let's go back to that. Now let's, instead of fighting one person, let's fight multiple people. Everybody in this picture is stuck. Okay, except for the back guy in yellow who can have a pointless pile-in. Like, he can scoot a little. He can, like, scooch and still be out of range. Eventually, he's going to hit a point where he's locked. Because everybody, the front 3 people touching, the front 3 green balls touching the blue balls are locked. And they have locked everybody else. Because of the proximity of how these people are set up to certain models, nobody can move. They can't end closer. Even the bottom green guy, right next to the stuck no attack arrow, because he's closer to the blue guy that's directly on top of him, effectively directly up the vertical line, he can't swing out and attack that far guy on the corner, even though he seems to have a clear line to that dude. He can't go over there because he would be moving farther away from the person he's closest to, which is actually the one that's at the top of the little vertical stack he's on. Everybody's stuck in the green unit. Nobody goes anywhere. And again, if there's more people stacked out behind this, there's more people not moving. This is a very easy situation to get into. Okay? Now, let me pause here and say the best way where this doesn't matter is if the units are actually, if you don't have a heavily defensive game, and bodies are hitting the floor. If we've just let the bodies hit the floor, if these two units are both strongly offensive, this doesn't bother you as much. Because what happens is people start dying, you can remove certain casualties, and you can then pile in around it. And if people are just dropping like flies, enough people are fighting, the combat stays dynamic, the problem isn't exacerbated, right? Where this becomes a problem mainly in the old world and the new one is if blue unit is some kind of weird anvil. If that's like a hardcore, hard to kill unit, if it's some buffed up unit of sequitors or something, right? And you're attacking them with a fairly low rend unit, well, congratulations. It's going to be 2 big units standing there doing nothing for a large portion of the game. Well, the sequitors are probably still going to actually kill them too. They might as well be a hammer and an anvil. That's a different video. But the point is that you could easily get in a situation where you just have 2 units just standing there. and you're really going to feel that when your unit just standing there has 15 people who are literally in queue to get coffee. Okay. Now, if we move to, but this is all how it was, you say, but this was AoS 1. What's this look like in AoS 2? The answer is it looks exactly the same. Because of this FAQ ruling. I won't reread the whole text, but the effective answer here is if I'm locked against 2 models, if I have a double lock situation where I am touching 2 models, which by the way is not hard to cause. It's quite easy. The nature of these circular bases means it's actually quite easy to touch 2 different bases at once. Okay. as is happening here with 2 out of the 3 blue circles, right? In fact, one of the circles is touching like 4 dudes. I'm sorry, one of the blue circles is touching 2, but the green one, sorry, I double locked. What's interesting here is that now it's just the same thing. By having the blue circle unit being in this sort of triangle formation, they've effectively shut off the enemy pile-in. Mr. Pointless Pile-In can scooge a little, but he can't get around to do anything, right? Because, again, it'd be too far. It's over 3 inches for him to get up top, and he can't end at least as close, like he is, however far he is away from that blue one. And just spatially, regardless of the exact number, you can see that there's no way he can get close to that guy, other than to, like, maybe he can, like, slide up and fit in the middle, but he's still probably more than his distance away, depending on the size of the base. This is interesting that the situation will change based on the size of the base. If the green guys are 40 mils, that dude is definitely stuck forever and will never attack, because if he has a 1-inch reach, right? But if these are like 25 mils, then little green guy may be able to pile up into that sort of hook in the center and reach over top and get an attack in, but then everybody else behind him is still stuck. It's just fascinating how base size really, really matters when it comes to big units like this. The difference between a unit like this being on 25s versus 32s versus 40s is absolutely stunningly massive, because the 3 inches always remains the same, right? So if you have very small models, sometimes you can pile around people on 25s, whereas 32s and 40s tend to get stranded really easy. So effectively, we've changed nothing. If I've got 10 more people behind Pointless Pile-In Man, they all just sit there in the queue. Nobody can move. Nobody can do anything. These number of models are fighting, and this is the end of the story. Now again, casualties will remove people. The situation can evolve and change. And by the way, that's why, in the end, we don't tend to feel this as badly. One of the great design choices about AoS is that it tends to favor offense over defense, which is good. Games where things die and get killed, I have a whole video on why offense is better than defense in this series. If you want to go back and watch that, you can. But the short answer is, I know there are some people who like really defensive armies. That's fine. I understand, and I want to speak to their profile, to their psychographic profile of what they enjoy. But highly defensive armies make the game worse. There's a lot to that, but that's a true statement. Fortunately, AoS favors offensive armies. And because of that, units tend to die and hence get shuffled around when casualties are removed, and you don't feel this as often. But it can happen. And when it does, which is rare, it's super annoying. And that's the key. That situation I just described is actually exactly the problem. All right? So we've gone from one rule to another, and when we first read that new rule, we thought, oh, yay, we solved the problem. Piling in is smooth and fast, and we have no issue. And then we went to, and then the FAQ answer happened and undid all the good. So let's summarize this up. The new rules seemed to be trying to simplify pile in. It seemed to say, we want to allow units to more easily get into combat with each other. Still in a reasonable fashion. They can't all just get in, but they can filter. By the by, why do I know this? Because there was actual designer commentary saying this. The people said it in talks. We want to simplify. We want to streamline each phase of the game. We took a lot of effort to do this. They said it in the articles that were posted. This is the stated goal. I'm not inferring this. I might as well be quoting this. I'm certainly paraphrasing it. Okay. But this ruling, this FAQ, keeps... The reason it's so challenging is what made it worse than it was in AoS 1. Let me see if I can unpack that for you. In AoS 1, no matter what, my models always piled in the same regardless of the number of models they were fighting. If I was fighting a monster, I could get locked, and that was unfortunate. If I was fighting a unit, I could get locked, and that was unfortunate. Now, when I'm fighting a monster, I act like a big single model, I mean by that. Could be a hero, a single hero, whatever. I'm just using monster as the generic single model large base term. my unit acts one way. But when I'm fighting a unit and they start double locking me, my unit acts a different way. That's the heart of complexity. When a single action in the game is, because of nuance, executed in two completely different ways, that's complexity at its heart. Like, people talk about complexity in game design a lot. I think they use that term incorrectly. Complexity in game design means the rules causing unusual interactions in differing situations based on the game element itself or the situation the game element interacts with. If the rule is do A unless B or C or D, and in B you do this, and in C you do this, and in D you do this, that's a complex rule. Because A has all these sub-things I have to remember and hold in check whenever I execute it. All right? And that's what we've created here. Piling in says, do it in this way, unless you have this double lock situation. Then don't act like that at all. And don't get your unit into combat, and don't go forward. And don't do the thing we were trying to do as our stated goal. Your units act completely differently for seemingly no reason. Everybody goes back to the coffee line queue. Why? Who knows? Now, again, I don't want to overblow this. I mean, which is funny. Vince, you just made a half-hour video about this. I did, but that's because it takes time to explain the nuance. People often just like slough this off and they're like, it's not a big deal. I think it is. I don't like stuff like this because I notice these little proud nails. Now, is it like destructive to the game? No, not in the macro sense. Because it's rare. But that's why it's annoying. It is a proud nail. You can walk across a deck with a proud nail 100 times and never catch your foot. But the second you catch your bare foot walking full speed across that proud nail, you remember it on time 101. The rarity of it is what makes it worse. Because it then becomes something that's a true gotcha. Right? And by the by, how do you fix this? How could this be fixed? This is the easiest thing to fix in the world. The FAQ answer was wrong. That's like number one. Here's the correct answer. You ready? The correct answer is so the question was what if I'm, equally distant from two models? Okay. Answer. Choose one of those models to be the model you must remain at least as close to. Now pile in accordingly. Ta-da! You still can't jump the whole line. You still can't swing your whole unit into combat. You probably can't even get your whole 3-inch pile in. But every time you pile in, you can swing down the line one base. Allowing you to filter smoothly and efficiently. Because you're just going to pick, that can be the rules expression, but the actual way people would play it is just everybody moves down a step. We all just Harry Belafonte jump in the line, and the unit slowly filters in, and it's smooth and simple and easy. Big units still don't get into combat super fast, but people don't just stand around when there's an enemy 6 feet away, pretending like they're not there, forgetting how to fight. It makes logical sense from a game design perspective, and it makes logical sense in the world. It is the simplest fix in the universe. Which is another reason that I don't like that FAQ answer. So, there you go. That's what's wrong with it and how I would fix it. It's a simple fix. I hope it happens. We'll have to wait for the next FAQ. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed this. I know this is a deep dive. This is I was motivated about this because it's been something stuck in my craw since that FAQ answer. But that's all I've got for you this time. I hope you enjoyed this little deep dive into a simple mechanical thing. Like I said, in the end, to be absolutely clear, I love AoS 2. It is a smooth surface. I think it is a wonderfully great game. And it's only because there's these few little proud nails that I even notice them. Because the rest of the surface is so great. So, watch out for those double locks. Hope you enjoyed this deep dive into into some serious inside baseball. As always, I appreciate you watching. Give it a like if you liked it. Subscribe for more hobby cheating, Warhammer Weekly, and game design videos in the future. Always share this if you know somebody else who you think might get tripped up by this rule. Sharing is always greatly appreciated. But I thank you for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.